Well, we've made it 5 out of 5. I really thought seriously about just resting on Thursday's show. You know, it's slow right now. It's easy to justify not convening the Friday edition of PFT PM. But I gave my word. My word's my bond, except when it isn't. We're back for one more day before PFT Live returns on Monday. And then the show goes on the road to Indianapolis Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at the Scouting Combine. It's one of those weeks that I both love and hate. It's exhilarating. It's exciting. It's exhausting. And it's hard to just be on all the time. And that's what it becomes, especially once we start interviewing the prospects. And I love the opportunity to talk to the new guys entering the NFL, learn about them, what they've experienced in college football, how they interact, which guys seem like they've got it, which guys maybe need a little work. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. But it is a long week, just a few weeks after we were in New Orleans, and then it slows down. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. The travel slows down, but free agency is coming right on the heels of the Scouting Combine, and we will continue to rocket through the offseason. And before you know it, training camps will be open, and the Eagles will embark on the defense of their Super Bowl championship. It'll be here before you know it. By the way, something else that'll be here before you know it. I don't know if you can see this. This is a deep cut. This is from one of the drawers that I don't open very often. I usually go with closest and the cleanest. I had a little time today. I thought I was ahead. I ended up being 5 minutes late for the taping. The more time you think you have, the less time you do have. But in time, there will be a new array of PFT merch. This is a prototype sweatshirt from years ago that I found. Still fits, still warm. Maybe something like this will be available soon when the merch switch is flipped. It's coming, they tell me. I'm one of the reasons why it isn't already available. I can't blame anyone else. People send me emails and ask for my input, and when you're busy, certain things get prioritized and certain things don't. But plenty of people want to buy PFT merch. We're not looking to create a significant revenue stream here, but people want it, so it's coming eventually, inevitably, hopefully. Something that is eventually, inevitably, hopefully coming for those who want to see Aaron Rodgers continue in the National Football League is a new team. And I've been saying for weeks, when people look at the lay of the land, who's going to be trying to upgrade at the quarterback position, where the landing spots could be for Aaron Rodgers, don't waste your time penciling in the word Raiders. Why would he want to play for the Raiders? All due respect to the Raiders, but as of right now, I think an objective assessment of the Raiders organization would be, we're a solid 4th out of 4 in the AFC West. You got 3 playoff teams. You got the Chiefs, who are the perennial AFC finalists. They could have banners up the wazoo if they had the inclination like the Colts did to hang a banner every single time they're in the AFC Championship. They've been to the Super Bowl 5 times. They've won 3. The Chargers are on the rise. The Broncos are on the rise. Where are the Raiders, especially without a high-end quarterback? They have 2 foundational pieces in Brock Bowers and Max Crosby, but why would you want to go to the Raiders if you want to win? And Rodgers told TMZ recently, it all comes down to who wants him and are they good? Now, you could twist yourself into a mental pretzel to call any team good. I mean, any team in the NFL is in theory in possession of a chance to have everything work out. And if Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers, that makes a difference. A bad team becomes a good team. Just add Rodgers. I think he's going to be aiming higher. I think he's going to want to avoid having another bad stop to go along with the last 2 years with the Jets. 4 snaps, 5 wins, the fewest wins of his career as a full season starter. He doesn't want to have another bad season like that. He doesn't want to go out that way. At some point, it sticks to him. He's going to want to rectify what happened. Remember, I believed all along he didn't want to go back to the Jets, and he wanted the Jets to be the ones who pulled the plug so he can use that as motivation. So there will be a dotted line comparison, maybe a straight line comparison all year long. What the Jets do with whoever their new quarterback is, what Rodgers does with whoever his new team is. And that will be a competition. If he stays in the AFC, do the Jets make the playoffs? Does Rodgers' new team make the playoffs? NFC, it's going to be a little more tenuous. It's easier to make the comparisons if Rodgers stays put in that conference. Here are the teams that I think could be in play for Rodgers. And some are looking for starters. Some might be looking for backups, like the Dolphins. Rodney Harrison and I talked about this last week. Would the Dolphins not make sense with Rodgers as the available backup to Tua Tagovailoa, who has been injury prone? I don't know that Rodgers would want to go in as number 2, but when you look at the history of the quarterback position in Miami, recent history, there's going to be an opportunity to play. I think it's better for Rodgers to wait and see if and when an injury happens to Tua Tagovailoa. The problem, though, is if you wait and they have their QB2 in place, then you get into the question of whether or not we go next man up or we bring in a guy who hasn't been here. We bring in a guy who we don't know and we don't know him, and we throw that dynamic on top of everything else. It's almost better to go there, be there, and then just wait and see what happens. The problem is it would be a major distraction. There'd be questions about whether or not Aaron Rodgers is actually better than Tua. There would be a sense that Rodgers has picked a spot where he thinks there's a chance the starter is going to get injured, so he's secretly rooting for the starter to get injured. I don't think it's in Miami's interest. I think it's a place to watch in the event that Tua Tagovailoa gets hurt, and there are plenty of opportunities to get injured short of the actual start of the regular season. It's just a team to watch, especially given the recent history of the quarterback position. The Steelers are the ones that have always made sense. Do they want him? That's the question. Deshaun Elliott has come around. He's the guy who put on social media a week or so ago, keep his ass in the retirement home, or words to that effect. Next thing you know, there's a picture on social media of Deshaun Elliott with Aaron Rodgers, and Deshaun Elliott's on board. Now, it's possible that they had a throwing session that day, and it's possible that Aaron Rodgers lit up Deshaun Elliott. Nothing convinces a guy that someone's old ass shouldn't be at the retirement home than seeing that guy cook. I don't know for a fact that that happened. It's possible that that's what made Deshaun Elliott come around. Doesn't mean that Mike Tomlin, Art Rooney, Omar Khan are going to come around and say, let's bring Rodgers to Pittsburgh. But the Steelers are the ones that make sense from Rodgers' standpoint. The Browns are going to be looking for a quarterback. Are they good enough to attract Rodgers? They're already repelling Myles Garrett. Like if Rodgers is looking for objective indications that the Browns are a contender, their top defensive player, first overall pick in the 2017 draft, wants out. He's agitating for a trade. I think it becomes harder for Rodgers to make the case to himself that the Browns are contenders. The Giants are looking for a quarterback. Hey, he wouldn't have to move. And there's been some, maybe. No. I think they are still too many players away for Rodgers to think he's going to be able to compete with the Cowboys, the Commanders, and the Eagles in the NFC East. The Vikings get mentioned from time to time, and I might have to cover hockey if that would happen, or just walk away if he'd end up in Minnesota. J.J. McCarthy is the guy who I think they're going to go with. Would they want to keep him on the bench for another year and take a shot with Rodgers? Would they bench Rodgers if it's not working out? See, that's the problem. If you bring Rodgers in and you have somebody who is being groomed to take over eventually, you reach the potential for that awkward moment during the season where the team needs a kick in the ass. Rodgers is showing greater signs of age and wear and tear. And what do you do at that point? Do you bench him? Do you cut him? I remember when the Vikings had Donovan McNabb, traded with Washington for him in 2011. They had drafted Christian Ponder. During the season, they decided to pivot to Ponder. They just cut McNabb. You can't keep him around. You can't keep the veteran around when you put him on the bench. So I don't know that it's in the Vikings' best interest. I know plenty of people are rooting for the next step in the Brett Favre career arc. It's 2 for 2 so far. It could go 3 for 3. Now there's a few other steps that maybe Rodgers will want to try to avoid, allegedly or otherwise. But the Vikings would be the next play to keep the Brett Favre comparisons intact. I don't think it's a good idea for the Vikings, but ultimately they're the ones who are going to make the decisions. And when you look at what Kevin O'Connell did with a guy who failed during his years with the Jets, I don't know. maybe he's the guy that can get the absolute most out of what Aaron Rodgers has left. I still think Rodgers can play at a high level. He needs to stop trying to run away from pressure and just get rid of the ball. He needs to play like he did the year that he had a bad calf, and he just stays in the pocket and fires away. And when the walls close in, he needs to get rid of the ball. Don't take the hits, and don't do something that might pop another Achilles tendon or the first one again. The Saints, if they don't keep Derek Carr, it looks like they want to, but who knows what's going to happen there. The Seahawks, if they would decide to move on from Geno Smith, but they're saying all the right things that would suggest they want to continue indefinitely with Geno Smith. And then there's the Rams. We talked about that the other day. Makes sense from Rodgers' perspective, makes no sense from the Rams' perspective. To go 4 years older than Matthew Stafford, who's currently playing at a higher level than Aaron Rodgers. Why would you do that if you're the Rams? It's easy to see why you do it if you were Rodgers. It's a good team that made it to the final 8. They're the one team that gave the Eagles a tough game in the postseason. He'd be close to where he lives now. It would make a ton of sense for Rodgers. It would make zero sense for the Rams. So from my perspective, I didn't mention the Titans. I still look at the presence of Chad Brinker, who was in Green Bay in the front office for 13 years. And we always assume that because two people worked together in the past, they'll want to find a way to work together in the future. There's a chance that Chad Brinker has seen enough and heard enough and experienced enough with Aaron Rodgers that no thank you. And there's a chance that Rodgers knows enough about Brinker that his attitude is he's no different than the other people in the front office I didn't like. Remember the report from Charles Robinson that Rodgers wanted to get Brian Gutekunst, the GM, fired, and he had the press conference Rodgers did starting training camp, I think 2021, where he just went scorched earth about the attitude, the dismissiveness, the condescension from the front office toward the players. You just work here. You just play here. We don't care if you got 15 years of experience. We're going to make the decisions about who the players are. That was off-putting to Aaron Rodgers. And if he identifies Brinker with that front office mentality that he battled with in Green Bay, he won't want to go to Tennessee, and Brinker might not want him. Or they love each other. And you look at Tennessee, you look at the division they're in, maybe they're not far away from contending. But I think the Steelers make the most sense. Maybe the Titans. I don't think there's any other obvious seat, and I don't think there's any other obvious contender or even arguable contender, and that might make Aaron Rodgers just decide to move on. Or, as I've suggested in the past, and this relates to the Dolphins, wait to see if a starting quarterback suffers a season-ending injury with another team, with a team that is a shortlist Super Bowl contender. In 2023, we saw plenty of injuries, starting with Rodgers, 4 snaps into the season. In 2024, we didn't. So, to be determined. But there really hasn't been a lot of clear reporting that there's a team out there that's waiting to pounce on Aaron Rodgers once the Jets cut him on the first day of the league year. Zack Martin, longtime rock of the Cowboys offensive line, has decided to retire. He's had plenty of injuries. Look, football is a demanding and physical game. 11 seasons in the NFL. It's a long time for any offensive lineman to make it. He's the guy that the Cowboys drafted in 2014 at a time when Johnny Manziel had slipped and slid and Jerry Jones had an affinity for Johnny football, and they had to talk Jerry out of putting John Manziel on the card. They went with Zack Martin out of Notre Dame, and he's put together a Hall of Fame career, but he'll have the ultimate individual accolade, but he never got close to the ultimate team accomplishment. 1 divisional round playoff game, I think, for him, maybe 2. They played the Packers at home 1 year in the divisional round. That was the Aaron Rodgers laser to Jared Cook that fueled the late win by Green Bay. And then there was the Des Cottet game in Martin's rookie year. My God, it's been 10 years ago since the Des Cottet game. Otherwise, the Cowboys have been a failure. They're very profitable. No drought. No drought when it comes to the big Mamu. Major drought when it comes to on-field accomplishments and the entirety of Zack Martin's career. They never played in an NFC championship. They haven't played in an NFC championship since 1995. But they need to work on that offensive line. The very sizzle-obsessed Cowboys knew back in that time frame, if we're going to have a good team, we need to have a good line, and they devoted the resources. Now they're going to have to devote more resources to the offensive line so that the retooled running game can do something more than it's done in recent years, and Dak Prescott can do more to justify the $60 million per year contract he received last season. Speaking of running backs, James Cook. He made a comment on social media last week. He's looking for $15 million a year. He was on the Nightcap podcast with Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco talking about his contract. He just wants what's fair. The problem is the collective bargaining agreement creates boundaries to a player getting what's fair. What's fair is what he would get on the open market. But when you've got a 4-year contract that is standard, you can't negotiate 3 years or 2 years. You can't negotiate year to year. If you're drafted, it is a CBA agreed 4-year contract. Then the CBA allows, if you're not a first-round pick, and Cook was not a first-round pick, the team to apply the franchise tag. Then after 1 tag, 2 tags, maybe 2 tags, maybe 1 tag, then you get your shot, like Saquon Barkley did. Saquon Barkley had to go the full 5 years because he was a first-round pick. So they did the 4-year contract, 5th-year option, 6-year franchise tag, and then the Giants finally decided, in lieu of giving him a 20% raise over his first-year franchise tag, to tag and trade him or keep him or do a long-term deal, they'd let him walk away. So before Cook has a shot to get his true fair market value, he's got to put in 2 more seasons. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay effective. You got to hope the wear and tear doesn't start to diminish his overall value. It's not in his interest to hold out. The CBA now takes away, I think, immediately. You used to have a little window to hold out before you would lose a year of credit toward free agency. Now, if you're under contract and you don't show up, you lose the year of credit toward free agency. He would not be a free agent next March 2026 if he fails to show up for training camp. A hold in is a greater possibility. He shows up, contract negotiations continue. He doesn't practice until he gets his contract. But the risk you run there is if the 2 sides don't work out a deal, then you get into that awkwardness that we saw with Jamar Chase and the Bengals last year, where time to play. Are you going to play? Or are you not going to play? Are we going to fine you for not practicing? How do we work that part of it out? That's where it becomes awkward and potentially ugly. But I think that is where it might be heading if the Bills don't give Cook the contract he believes he has earned, even though the Bills have ways to prevent him from getting fair value. And with running backs, we know what can happen. Often, now, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs have defied this, but often you've already had your best years before you're eligible to get paid. And you try to get the team to pay you based upon the hope that you'll continue to play the way you have. History tells us that plenty of running backs can't. Recent history tells us the great running backs can. Barkley, Henry, Jacobs. But Cook still has 2 years to go, minimum, before he can leverage the kind of exit that those guys experienced. Something to keep an eye on. Will they pay him sooner or later? What are they going to do with Josh Allen's contract? Big cap number this year. He's averaging $43 million a year. He's woefully underpaid. I know that the powers that be in Buffalo don't like it when we point out, facts. But the reigning MVP at $43 million a year is dramatically underpaid. And at some point, the only way to get his cap numbers under control, because what they do with these contracts, they load up the cash early, they engineer the cap numbers to be low, and then they'll worry about the rise in the cap number because those dollars you get early, if they don't hit the cap then, they're going to hit the cap later. You got to figure out how to deal with it. They did a restructuring last year. You can only do the restructuring thing so often before you end up with a cap number. You're like, we just have to deal with this. What do we do here? Do we just take a year where we're in cap purgatory? I remember that was a term back in the late 90s. Over the past 20, 25 years, teams have figured out how to put their best effort on the field even when there's discomfort when it relates to the cap. There's definitely discomfort when it relates to Allen's contract and Cook at $5 million for 2025. He's going to be looking for more sooner rather than later. I thought it was interesting to see that Shiloh Sanders, Deion's son, who wasn't invited at all to the scouting combine, is bringing the folks who provide the official timing at the combine to him so he can do an apples to apples 40-yard dash. I like that. It's creative. And when you've got NIL money, you can pay for that. But there's one glitch in that thought process, and it has to do with the surface. And I've been hearing about this for years. How do you compare the times that are run at Lucas Oil Stadium on the surface there to the times that are run elsewhere on different surfaces? And it's one of the sneaky little things. And the scouts will add a 10th based upon where it is that a guy has run his 40. If you really want to do it right, find a way to get access to Lucas Oil Stadium and do it there. Easier said than done. It's almost like I'm going to pay my own way to the combine. You didn't invite me, I'm coming. And I'm paying the folks who do the timing a little extra to stick around. So after the event's over, I'll just run my 40 on my own. I don't know that the powers that be will allow that, but that's the right way to do it if you truly want a reading for your 40-yard dash time that reflects what it would have been. Just show up and run it in the same spot, just after hours. That's the best way to go. And this leads to a broader question that never gets discussed, but what the hell? It's kind of slow. How do we know that we're truly getting the best prospects invited to the scouting combine? Where do they draw the lines? And I don't mean any disrespect to the scouts who are responsible for picking the people who come to the combine, but they work for a service that isn't one of the teams. Like, I had a scout tell me this years ago, we're relying upon the assessments of people who aren't skilled enough to become scouts with teams to determine who comes to the combine. And my guess is that they talk to scouts with teams to help shape the list. And the cynical side of me that thinks somebody is always up to something, because as I was practicing law, I learned that somebody's always up to something. It's just a question of what and how you can prove it. I wonder if scouts with teams that have on their radar a guy that they want to be able to get late in the draft steers the scouts who put together the combine invites away from that guy so that others won't figure out that this guy has got it. I wonder if that happens, because I know that all's fair in love, war, and football, and that the draft ultimately is 4D chess. And there's all sorts of pre-verifications and manipulations and embellishments that happen because teams just want to get their best players. Like, okay, what's this aspect of the game? It's called hope that the guys you want are there when you want to take them. Okay, well, there's this guy that we think we can get in round 7, but we better make sure other teams don't know how good he is. Let's do whatever we can to keep him from demonstrating that he's good enough. Now, everybody knows about Shiloh Sanders, but it just makes me wonder who gets in, who's left out, how do they draw the lines? I like the fact that Shiloh Sanders is paying for the same timing, but I think to really go apples to apples, get to Indy, pay them to stick around, ask the NFL if you can just leave the lights on for 5 minutes and let him run a 40 on his own. I don't know if the NFL would want to set that precedent, but hey, if you get an extra 15 minutes of TV time of the Underwear Olympics on NFL Network, who knows? Maybe they decide this is a good thing, that we're going to invite a certain number of guys and then the rest of them can do the pay your own way and run the 40 at your own cost. And we'll televise it on NFL Network and we won't give you any of that money. Lastly, it is kind of a slow day. I could go for an hour. I could go for 30 minutes. This is going to be about 30 minutes unless I get caught up in this topic and babble for another 30. The NFL is going back to Brazil. First Friday of the season. Now, remember, they can only get away with the first Friday night of September when Labor Day falls in a way that it's not the second Friday. It's got to be the first Friday in September after Labor Day. If it lands with Labor Day already after the first Friday in September, and we know that Labor Day is the first Monday in September. So if it's the 4th of September that lands on a Monday. That means the first of September was a Friday. You can't play a Friday night game due to the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1960, which says in exchange for the broadcast antitrust exemption, the NFL can't play Friday or Saturday games from the second weekend in September until the second weekend in December. But in those years where the first Friday of December follows the first Monday of September, first Friday of September follows the first Monday of September, which is Labor Day, then you can do it. So NFL's going back to Brazil. Chargers are hosting the game. And what I saw yesterday that caught my eye, the NFL is going to work to improve the playing surface in Brazil. Well, I don't know why we don't demand more from the NFL when it comes to playing surfaces. If you're going to start taking the game anywhere and everywhere, up to and including the moon, you better be damn sure that the playing surface is exactly like. It's got to look the same on TV. It's got to play the same for the players. Why is that always the afterthought? That should be, if they're doing it the right way, the first line item should be ensure that the playing field is exactly like the playing field at home. And let's identify all factors. Let's test it out. Let's spare no expense and let's get it right. Last year, it was a slip and slide, just like the Super Bowl that the Eagles played a couple of years ago against the Chiefs. That's inexcusable. And if there's going to be no accountability, if all the NFL says is, oops, we'll try better next time, it's never going to get any better. There's always going to be a first time. There's always going to be a screw up. Because what is the downside? They take a little flack in the media. Jerry Jones would say, no publicity is bad publicity. They're talking about us. We're giving them a controversy. It's the ultimate reality show, including the wrinkle of, will the players be able to run on the field without busting their asses? I'd like to think that, and this applies to the ongoing debate between grass and artificial, like, how in the hell? You can regard the players as nameless, faceless automatons, as the literal pieces in the machine, the interchangeable parts in the giant football machine that inevitably will be replaced with someone younger and cheaper, whether they choose to leave the machine, whether they're ripped out of the machine, whether they're broken, whatever. You can view them as anything other than human. But why would you not? Not that you should. I'm just saying, even if you do, why the hell would you not protect your investment in those parts? Whatever you've invested your money in requires a certain amount of protection. It's mind-boggling that the owners won't insist on protecting their investments. You know, this whole talk about the NHL Four Nations face-off and how great it is for hockey. Yeah, guess what? You're going to have a bunch of guys limping back to their teams and not able to play for some period of time because they got banged up playing in an exhibition game. And the teams are going to be upset. Why? Because they put their investments at unnecessary risk. Why do you think the NFL doesn't have a full contact, full speed, go for the jugular Pro Bowl in the middle of the season? Who wants that? Who wants to risk their investment not being able to perform when it's time to play the games that count? So why don't they? I don't get it. And this is one of the main reasons I will never believe the NFL is rigged. I don't think they're competent enough to pull it off for all the great things that the NFL does. And look, spare me the why do you hate the NFL? I love the NFL as a game. I reserve the right to criticize the stewards of the game who work for the NFL for doing things that undermine the game. And it's their fault. Once upon a time, the main indoctrination method for kids throughout America was NFL films. And when you create this grandiose experience with slow motion football, spiraling, but just off a little bit to make it look even better in the snow that's wafting down slowly in the voice of John Facenda, and you're a kid and it works, and you're sitting there at the TV and you're smitten by this thing that is pro football, and it occupies in your mind a higher plane than anything else as it relates to sports, and you root for it, actively root for it to become as popular as baseball, more popular than baseball, more popular than any other sport on the planet, because everyone should know the greatness of the NFL. You create a standard that gets turned back against you when you screw things up. I'm not trying to agitate the NFL because it's fun. It's not. I'm not doing it just to be different. This is my way of being different from everybody else. No, I want the NFL to be great. I want it to be that thing that they made me think it was with NFL Films back in the early 70s. So whether it's not worrying about gambling nearly as much as they should, whether it's subpar officiating, whether it's determining whether or not a team got a first down with 2 sticks and 10 yards of chain, and the naked eyes of 2 different officials who engage in this weird mating ritual to decide who's going to defer to who as to where the spot is, with one guy being in the spot where it keeps a team's hope very much alive to score a win in a pretty impactful game, and the other guy is in the different spot that turns it the other way. Why wouldn't anyone who cares about the game, who was lured down the path, the popcorn trail, the candy on the witch's house that lured Hansel and Gretel inside, why wouldn't that kid say, what the hell are you guys doing? You can do it better. One last thing. And this is not a political comment, because the thing that happened last night before the U.S.-Canada Four Nations face-off final could happen in a way that cuts to the right, to the left, or some other direction. Apparently, the person who sang the Canadian national anthem at the arena in Boston, where the game was played, revised the lyrics slightly as a protest to all the talk about Canada being subservient to the U.S. and Canada becoming the 51st state. It was just one line. And hell, I don't know, because I don't know the lyrics to the Canadian national anthem, but it was one line. It was a subtle change. And it got us to thinking. We send, as I pointed out a couple of weeks ago, more than 100 text messages among the PFT writers thread. And MDS made this point. What kind of vetting is done of the folks who sing the anthem at NFL games? You've got the individual regular season games. You've got the bigger ticket games like the Super Bowl. What's done to make sure that no one's going to go rogue? Right, left, or otherwise? What's in place? Is there a contract that says whatever you're paid, you don't get any money if you change the lyrics? Is there a financial penalty that gets paid if you change the lyrics? Subtle changes. I don't know that it's ever happened in pro football. Of course, it's impossible to monitor the national anthem being sung at every stadium. But I'd like to think in this day and age, if somebody made a sufficiently significant change to the lyrics of the national anthem as a protest of something, right, left, or otherwise, we'd know about it. I think back to my high school years. We used to do the Pledge of Allegiance every day. I went to a Catholic high school, and the Catholics have always been very strong anti-abortion. It was a big deal. And it was right around the time, I think, that the Supreme Court, what was about 10 years after Roe v. Wade, and the Pledge of Allegiance every morning at the end, liberty and justice for all, 3 words added, born or unborn, every day, tattooed into your brain, change to the lyrics, change to the lines. What change could somebody add, right, left, or otherwise, to the national anthem? What's the NFL done to safeguard it? We've kind of accidentally discovered a defect in the system. I've asked the league if they have anything currently in place. If they don't, maybe they should. All it takes is one, as we saw last night, even if most people didn't notice it. It's just another thing the NFL should be thinking about. And this gets back to my concern that there really isn't, in my assessment, anyone at 345 Park Avenue who is just charged with worrying about shit. Like, what can go wrong? How do we envision proactively the various pitfalls of this business, whether it's rules that will eventually change after we're embarrassed by the fact that the rule doesn't cover that, instant replay doesn't cover that thing that it should, business issues, legal issues. I've always said the NFL is far more reactive than proactive, and we've seen it manifest itself with personal conduct, all sorts of ways. Who is the person who is strategizing and envisioning all the things that could go wrong for the business? It's too easy to just sit back and count the money, because the money's falling from the sky. It's one of the reasons why there aren't full-time officials. I'll leave you with this. I've been pushing as hard as I can for the league to have full-time officials. I think they need to create the perception they're doing everything they can to get every call right. And this idea that somebody's got two different jobs. Peter King was embedded with Gene Sterator's crew 10 years or so ago after Peter launched the MMQB vertical at SI.com. And he told the story of one member of the crew who's working his job and single parent, taking care of his kids. And then about 10:30 at night, he starts doing his work in advance of the game that he's working that weekend. You're stretching these folks way too thin. Make them full-time. Get their full attention. I think one of the reasons why, and I had somebody tell me this, one of the reasons why it won't happen is not just the money. Because the NFL is so dead set against embracing full-time officials, you need someone in the league office who is willing to burn his or her political capital to be the one that stands up against the breeze, that goes against the grain, that pushes against the current. And if you've already got plenty of work to do, like, you know, let's say I was trying to recruit someone in the league office to be the champion for full-time officials, the conversation would go like this: will you be the champion for full-time officials? And the response will be, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? I already work hard. I'm underpaid because they're cheap. And now on top of everything else, I'm going to be the one to try to come up with a way to bring this topic up and push it past any initial resistance, even though they clearly don't want it. And I'm going to be an irritant. I'm going to be an agitator. I'm going to be a person that they can't wait to say, please get the hell out of here. It's just not worth it. That's true of a lot of organizations. There's a culture, there's a mindset. And if you're the one trying to push against it, you better be ready to go. You better feel so strongly about it that you're willing to give up your career working in that organization, because when you become the one that is the constant pain in the ass, you know, like I am on the outside, then you set yourself up to eventually be no longer employed by the NFL. I think that's one of the big reasons why we haven't seen and won't see full-time officials. These are just shit I've added on to the end. Sorry, Gary. Gary's the one that's got to clip it out today. That's it. I'm done. We'll be back Monday with an all-new edition of PFT Live on Peacock, Sirius XM 85, Sky Sports NFL, podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This was supposed to be a slow week, thanks to a lot of news stories and at least one really old one. It wasn't. See you Monday. Have a great weekend. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.